I'm joined today by Alex Mohajer, who is the co-founder of Bros4America, a progressive advocacy organization, and a political writer and commentator for the Huffington Post. You will soon remember when we mentioned an article by Alex just a few weeks ago. Alex was on Fox News last night with Tucker Carlson. It escalated very, very quickly, talking about an article that Alex wrote, which explains if indeed Donald Trump's election was precipitated, influenced by Russia, that there would be instructional data from a prior court case that could tell us how Donald Trump might be removed as president. And of course, that argument was drastically misstated yesterday by Tucker Carlson. Alex, before we get to the questions, let's just review a little bit of that appearance from last night.
And you're saying
that's
that
not what I said.
One judge or a panel of judges removing him would be more democratic than the election results. It seems like the opposite of democracy.
If it is found that there was wrongdoing, such as collusion with the Russian government to hack our elections, or with the FBI director to purposefully release a letter that he knew was bogus.
So you think there was collusion between Trump and the FBI director?
We'll see. The Department of Justice is investigating this.
A crackpot like you who would throw something out there with no evidence is distressing, and shame on the Huffington Post for putting your garbage.
Distressing? You know what's distressing is that people, it's that people on the name of partisanship won't listen to each other's arguments. It's that you're calling me a crackpot instead of listen. No, the difference
I was trying to listen, and you're alleging things that you can't know.
No.
Okay, so Alex, Tucker Carlson last night disparaged you personally, said it's all crazy. Yeah. But the question is not whether Trump is a legitimate president or not. Maybe we'll know that for sure at some point. The question is, if it were determined that he were not, what legal mechanism might exist to remove him?
Well, first of all, let me say, I am saying, that in my opinion, he's an illegitimate president. So I understand, I knew going into Fox News last night that he was going to attack me on that. I knew it. I anticipated that. What I didn't anticipate was that he was going to skew the argument and make it about something so irrelevant and so just sort of tangential to the entire case that it was just meant to make me look sort of nuts and try to get me with a gotcha moment, but didn't address the argument at all. And the shame about that is that most of the reaction that's come from people that are Fox News viewers, which has been insane, has basically taken that bit of it as being the argument, which it's not at all. So that's unfortunate.
So let's dig in. Let's have a conversation starting from the beginning. For right now, let's put aside that you happen to be of the opinion that Trump is not a legitimate president, and let's have the conversation about what you presented in your Huffington Post piece, which has now gone very, very viral. What would be the mechanism that could be used to remove Donald Trump from the White House?
Okay, so first of all, if something like this were to happen, it would need to happen because a court is deciding on a controversy that's been brought before them, right? Judges don't just issue decrees or remove somebody from office. And I don't know if that is made clear in my piece, because I assumed that people assume that. And it seems like the feedback from people who don't understand the system it seems to suggest that they don't realize that that's innate in the argument. So, it would need to happen through a court case. And as I'm aware, there are a couple that are before different district courts right now that we just haven't heard about in the press. But I know there's one in the 1st district and one in the 3rd district. Supposedly there's a case going up before Justice Ginsburg today. So we'll see. I mean, we'll see how it goes. But if those controversies come before the court, what I'm saying is there is federal case law on point that says that courts have broad discretionary power in remedying interferences with our free and fair elections.
And tell us about where that instruction comes from, which you cite in the article, of course.
Yeah. Well, in the article, I do cite to Marks v. Stinson, This is Bruce Wayne, by the way.
This is Alex's
He's not
dog. For
happy
people
with
who are
Tucker
listening to
Carlson.
the podcast, Alex's dog is getting very agitated by the talk of legal proceedings.
He hates it. Marks v. Stinson. It's a case from 1994 out of Pennsylvania, and it's a federal court case. And the first and only that I could find that saw a judge basically take the sitting state senator out of Pennsylvania at the time and replace him with his opponent from the election, the previous November's election. And it's because there was a showing of voter fraud that came up in that case. And that judge, his authority to replace the candidate was never called into question. There were procedural mishaps that occurred along the way, but that was basically upheld as being the takeaway from that case, is that judges, especially federal district courts, have broad discretionary power in issuing equity decrees, so that you can make sure that we have free and fair elections. That is a sentiment that's never come up before the Supreme Court in terms of a presidential election being overturned, but there is even case law that I mentioned in my piece as well. It's Donahue, the Donahue case, which didn't actually hear the issue, but did give a holding that said that that at the presidential level there would be authority to hold a new election, for instance.
I think where it starts to get a little complex is,
sure,
here we're talking about, can we prove a negative, in a sense, which would be, even if you could show that there was an attempt made by Russia to influence the outcome of the election, and I believe at this point it is unquestionable that that attempt was made, and even if you could argue that, in a sense, some influence took place, it's very hard to say what was the total impact of that influence, and would someone else really have won? And I don't know how you demonstrate that.
Right. So this is where I think it's also very interesting, is at least in the case law that I read, you wouldn't need to show that the outcome would have been changed for certain. All you have to show is that it could have been changed, or it could have been impacted by the wrongdoing, and then you have to show the wrongdoing and show that it cast doubt on the electorate as to the will of the electorate. So I posed the question in the article: does James Comey's letter to Congress pose a question as to whether or not the will of the electorate is reflected in the outcome? And then I point to different facts about the election that suggest that yes. Because this is a point that's not being driven home by anyone, whether it's mainstream or conservative media. The election was lost in the Electoral College with 79,000 votes in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. 79,000, and that's a stark comparison when you look at the total number of votes being around 136 million. That's saying that less than a tenth of a hundredth of a percentage point, it fell on that. So did James Comey's letter to Congress affect 79,000 votes, especially when I show evidence in my piece that there were like 50 million media mentions, negative media mentions in the final weeks of the campaign about Hillary Clinton's emails and James Comey's letter to Congress. I think the third most talked about negative media controversy was, I don't have it right in front of me, but I think it was the Access Hollywood tapes. And that got 5 million negative media mentions. So when you look at that 50 million versus 5, is it reasonable to say that that could have affected 79,000 votes? Could it have? That's what Marks v. Stinson is saying is the standard. Could it have? If so, then the federal district court, in its broad discretionary power, has the authority to say, well, the will of the electorate is not reflected. Let's have a new election.
Let's say you're right. Let's say you're right. Let's say you're completely correct in your reading of that case. From a pragmatic perspective, which judge is going to be the one that puts their name on making that call?
To be sure, I don't have any illusions about thinking that this is something that's plausible. And I was interviewed by PolitiFact about this, and I said, the likelihood that this happens is very slim. Does it mean that it can't happen or that it's impossible? No. And I think that we have one of the things I talk about in my piece is Americans and our culture of being quick to find. We are sort of urged to seek closure more than we are to seek answers, right? We're not supposed to mourn too long or too hard or too loudly, because that goes against the script. And just because it's never been done before doesn't mean that it shouldn't be mentioned as possible for posterity's sake and for the sake of justice. For those of us who believe that the election is, the outcome of the election is not reflective of the will of the electorate.
Make sure to check out Alex's piece in Huffington Post. If you can stomach the toxicity, check out his interview from last night with Tucker Carlson on Fox News as well. We've been speaking with Alex Mohajer. Alex, thanks so much for talking to us about this.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.